friends who I know and friends who I've yet to meet. It's lovely to be here. I appreciate, when you're sitting there all morning, it can get a little bit, how can I say, drowsy making, and also sometimes there isn't as much air in the room as one would like. If at any point you feel the need to kind of stand up or lie on the floor or move a bit or whatever you want to do to be comfortable as I natter away up until lunchtime, please do that. We are going to stay on schedule, so this is only going to be a fairly short session. We'll still aim to finish around 1:30. I'm sure your tummies will be rumbling by then, especially with all this talk about food. What I'm going to try to do in this session is to invite you to see health in a slightly different way than you might have previously viewed it. Some of you may be familiar with what I'm about to put up on the screen here. If this is something you've seen before, shh, don't give the game away, okay? Because I'm going to put this up and I'm going to ask you what you think you can see on there, okay? There's various different shapes in dark shading. Do those shapes mean anything to you, or do you think they're part of some sort of coding, or what would it mean to you? Sorry?
Buildings.
Buildings. I think it looks like buildings. That's a pretty good guess. Anybody else want to have a go at it?
Fly.
Aha! Somebody says it says fly. F-L-Y. Now if you just slightly shift the way that you look at it, and instead of looking at the shapes on a white background, you see white on a dark background. Can you do that?
Oh,
Yeah? And you can shift it to actually see that it says fly. Well, what you have just done, if you've been able to switch between those two things, is you've just created a miracle. Because it is said that a miracle is simply a shift in perception. The perception I'm talking about in this instant is the perception about one's health. Now, very commonly, particularly over here in the UK, where we bump into each other in the street and we say, oh, hello, how are you? And the person usually responds along the lines of, oh, fine, how are you? Or something like that. And how they're evaluating mostly that they're fine is by the absence of symptoms. So if they haven't actually got a headache that day, or they're not feeling nauseous, or they haven't got a big sore or something bleeding or something broken, then they evaluate themselves to be in relatively good health. And this is very common, that people simply evaluate how healthy they are by the absence of symptoms. Now, that is really, in my view, rather a negative way of looking at what health is all about. Health is our birthright, and it's something that is vibrant, and something that leads us to wake up in the morning, leap out of that bed and think, yes, is the world ready for me today? It's a little bit more than just, well, I haven't got a headache today, and I don't really feel nauseous, and I haven't got too much back pain, I'm not limping, I must be okay. Yeah, because that really is a whole different way of looking at things, isn't it? Now, what I will tell you is that I have spent many, many, many years lecturing and teaching and helping people to understand more about health. And it intrigues me as to the degree which people want to obtain information, even though it's not part of their profession. They just want to obtain more information for their own personal benefit. They want to know more and more and more. Well, I'm very much for this, and this is great, and I encourage people to improve their education. But when it comes to their own health, it doesn't matter how much they know, it will make zero difference to their health. Because the only thing that affects their health is what they apply in their own life. And it's phenomenal. Some people come up with these questions. Like Doug and I had a very interesting one once. Where do you get your cobalt from? I mean, we've heard the where do you get your protein, all those kinds of things, but where do you get your cobalt? Something which we require in very, very small amounts. And yet this person, we noticed during the lunch break, was consuming all sorts of the most horrendous convenience foods and takeaways and so on. It hardly becomes a refined issue of where you get your cobalt if you're still living on McDonald's. Yeah. So what really matters in our life as far as our own personal health is concerned is how much we apply what we know. Now, the wonderful thing about life is that our philosophies are always a little bit ahead of where we're actually at. And that is what helps us to keep on moving forward and moving forward. So it's great to expand on your knowledge, but do remember that if your knowledge gets too far ahead, you almost lose sight of what you're trying to do right here and right now. As you sit there today, with the exception of the genetic influence that you have, and you know all about genetics, don't you? It's choose your parents carefully, that one. I mean, if your mum and dad couldn't have kids, chances are you can't either, that one. Well, apart from genetics, as you sit there today, your level of physiological and psychological health are the accumulated result of the choices you've made so far. The choices you've made in terms of your diet, how much you exercise, the quality and quantity of your sleep, your selectiveness about the air that you breathe and the purity of it, about the amount of sunlight that you get on your skin, about the amount of positive or negative thought processes you allow to occupy your mind. So as you sit there, whatever you're sitting inside of in terms of your physical body, you've created it out of what you've been doing since the moment that you were born. So let's just take a little moment just to consider what the influence of genetics really means. Now, we are all born with stronger or weaker links in our physiological makeup. Our parents very kindly hand these things down to us, or to be more exact, our grandparents even more so. Now, because we have genetic weaker links, that in itself will not cause a disease necessarily. All it means is that if we cause the disease through our habits, if we have that weaker link, we are more liable to succumb to the results. Now, to give you an example, my father and both sets of grandparents, that's all 4 grandparents, and my father, all suffered from heart disease. So, according to statistics, I should be being tremendously careful because the chances are, when I, leave this physical form, it's going to be a heart attack that's given me the opportunity. Yeah? Now, the point is that I am not creating atherosclerosis because I am not running saturated fats and cholesterol through my circulatory system. I'm not smoking tobacco and other such things that create heart disease. But if I were to be doing those things, then because genetically I have that weaker linkage, then I would be more vulnerable perhaps than somebody else. Does that make sense to you? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, very often people will use genetics as an excuse, yeah, for all sorts of different things. And one classic one, of course, is obesity. When people say, well, it's in my family tradition, or my parents or my grandparents were all obese, and unfortunately, I've been doomed to be obese as well. What is more to the point is what we inherit in terms of lifestyle. Now, if your mum and dad tended to sit around all day long, eating fatty food, smoking cigarettes, drinking tobacco, and being inactive, you didn't really notice that was the wrong way around? Yeah. I just drop in those sorts of things every now and then to see if I get a reaction, to see if you're still awake out there. If your parents are doing this, and maybe probably their grandparents did it, which is why they did it, the chances are you'll do it as well. And so the fact that you end up obese with lung cancer is not a genetic inheritance in terms of your cellular DNA, it's a lifestyle inheritance, which is something quite different. How old do you expect to live until? What age do you reckon is a fairly good age when you figure, well, that was good innings, as they say? 120. Absolutely correct. Good. This lady needs a round of applause. Any other offerings? Any other ideas?
93.
93. Okay, we're coming down, but 85. 1,000. A million. Wow, what can I say? What can I say? In fact, physiologically, if we take the organ in our body which has typically the shortest life expectancy, which is the organ that works the hardest, do you happen to know which one that is? The liver, yes, the liver. The liver does more work than any other organ in your body. And all things being equal, your liver will last you a minimum of 115 years. So why is it that we're all kind of, going out in sections from about the age of 40 onwards, bit by bit? Well, one reason is that people are suffering suffering from two particular diseases. One disease, which I call INI disease. This is intellectually negated natural instincts disease. Okay? It's another thing, a way we can look at that is by saying that we get analysis paralysis. Yes, okay, we get so involved in the academia and the analysis of trying to work out what we should and shouldn't be doing health-wise that we totally lose touch with our simple natural instincts. The other syndrome is TOPS syndrome, technologically overridden common sense syndrome. This is another one as well. And it's incredible how many people I have observed who are nothing short of astounding me with their academic intelligence, and yet when their health is concerned, really do some silly things. And I think, well, where's the common sense? What happened to that? Now, I think a lot of it depends on what we focus on. And just to share with you something that happened to me recently that really brought this home was that Doug and I have been on the road travelling for, I don't know, seems like forever. Bless you. And there was one place we were recently out in Hawaii where there was this little ditch when we were out running, and there was a log across the ditch, and the ditch wasn't that deep. So just for fun, I said, oh, I'm going to cross on the log to practice my balance, because I like practicing balance. I think it's a good thing to play with. So there I am with this short little drop into this ditch. It was only probably about 3 foot, the drop. And I was just focusing on, I'm balancing, I want to practice my balance. I can balance on here, I know I can balance. And it was fine. And then only last week, we were out in San Francisco and we went for a run in this gorgeous redwood forest. And we got to this bit where there was another log across the ditch. But this time, folks, the ditch was not just like a 3 foot drop. This was like, fall off the log, you will die. Not quite, but I mean, it was a seriously steep drop. It could have been possibly 25, 30 foot, but there was a raging river underneath. And the difference was that when I stepped onto that log, do you think I was still thinking, I can balance, I'd like to balance, I'm working on my balance? What do you think I was thinking? Right, I was thinking, I mustn't fall in the water. If I slip, I'm going to die. If I fall from here, those rocks are really, and on went this nightmare of what would happen if I fell. Well, that really reminded me of what happens when we think about health. Because so often, we spend all our energy and time thinking, I must avoid heart disease, I must not get cancer, I must do something, I must try and avoid it. I must go to some health food store and get some superfoods, or I must go to an alternative therapist and get some treatment and some therapy, so I can avoid falling down into the pit of all these awful diseases. Now, what I'd like to do is to invite you to focus it the other way around by thinking, what I want to do is create health. I want to just focus on providing my body with everything it needs to totally flourish, totally thrive, and totally be vibrant. It's a completely different mindset. Do you get where I'm coming from here? Yeah? It's a completely different way of looking at it. People need to create for themselves health assurance rather than keep purchasing health insurance. Yeah? They want to be focusing on that which is going to take them where they're trying to get to, as opposed to focusing on what they're trying to avoid. Because what you put your energy into, expands. Have you heard that? What you send your thoughts and energy into gets bigger. And if you keep thinking about disease, that's exactly probably what you'll end up with. So how about thinking about health and what health means to you and how to create it? Let me just ask you this. I'm sure most of you, in fact, let's just find out who's interested in their own health. Okay, that was a challenging one, wasn't it? Let me just ask you, how do you know, or how would you evaluate that, yes, you are in a state of vibrant, thriving health? How do you know, it's like when you goal set, isn't it? People used to come to me, I've been working in the fitness industry for years, and when people used to come to me on the 1st of January, and they'd say, right, this is the year I'm going to get fit. And we try and have to quantify what fit meant, because I would say to them, well, how are you going to know when you've achieved your goal unless you know what it is your goal is, what you're striving for? So everyone here wants to be healthy. Well, tell me, what is it like? What does it feel like? How is it different from how you are now?
Like it felt when I was a kid.
Like you thought when you were a kid, you tell me that's a great description, isn't it? You see children just running about and playing. They're not running about thinking, oh dear, you know, I don't think I can run much further because I'm feeling a bit puffed, or oh, my back's playing up again, I better sit down for a while. I mean, they're just out there playing and having fun, yeah? So feeling like a child again, that's great. What else?
Energy.
Energy, isn't it? So much about energy. Now, I just want to clarify for you at this point the difference between energy and fuel. People tell you that when you eat food, it gives you energy, right? Wrong. If food gave you energy, then that would mean that you would sit down to a big hearty meal, and as soon as you'd finished it, you would feel like playing, going for a run, playing tennis, going for a swim, running up a mountain. But when you eat a big hearty meal, what do you feel like doing? You feel like curling up on the sofa and going to sleep.
I disagree as a vegetarian. I think as a meat eater, yes, but not as a vegetarian.
Right, so you think after the meal that you eat, you feel more energetic?
Well, oh no, not true, I agree. You don't feel more energetic.
Right.
You don't feel like falling asleep like you did when you were a meat eater.
I would totally agree with you. The more complex the digestive task and the more toxic the food you've eaten, the more drugged or narcotic you will actually feel after the meal. So that's absolutely right. What we need to bear in mind, though, is that in order for us to digest any food, it requires that the brain communicates with the body cells, in fact, specifically the digestive processes. Yeah? All the intelligence that you have is held up here in this little casing at the top. Okay? Your brain governs your body, and it governs your ability to digest food, and it governs how you go about digesting. And every second of your life, every single cell in your body is in two-way communication with your brain. All the time. It's a squeaky floorboard there. It's not me squeaking, honestly. This means that the brain, if you remove the brain from the rest of the body does nothing, because it no longer receives any messages. Not one person has ever survived being beheaded. Because you take the brain away, you take the intelligence away, and the rest of the body does nothing. Now, how does that brain and those cells, how do they communicate? Well, they communicate via your nervous system, and this is basic physiology. They communicate via your nervous system, and that nervous system runs on a low voltage electrical current that we call nerve force or nerve energy. And you only have so much of that nervous force or nervous energy in your body at any given time. And you use it up in everything you do. Digesting food takes up a tremendous amount of brain-body communication. This can be seen really clearly, can't it, at Christmas time. You know, people sit down, they have the most richest meal of the whole year, in probably the greatest quantity they've ever eaten all in one meal. And what happens is then they do tend to feel really sleepy. And that is because so many messages as to how to digest it and absorb it and assimilate it are whizzing up and down. Now this nervous force, this is regenerated all the time. But it is actually used up quicker than it's generated during your waking hours. And during your sleeping hours, it's generated quicker than it's used up. It's rather like putting your car battery on charge when you go to sleep. And I'm sure most of you have such spivvy, expensive, snazzy cars that you've never had to put your car battery on charge, have you? Well, I can assure you, in my days when I would just purchase an MOT, what came with it was irrelevant. Some of my cars, I used to have to actually charge up the battery every night, plug it in. Sarah, you've had a car like that. I can see you empathise with that. It's the same with your body, and if you don't charge it up long enough, you will find that it is challenging for your brain and cells to communicate, and that is when you start getting in a poorly way, things start going a bit haywire for you. This nervous energy or nervous force, as I say, is used up in everything we do. But one thing that it is used up with on a regular basis is to actually deal with the amount of toxins that accumulate inside your body. Now, we're producing toxins the whole time, naturally as part of our metabolic functioning. Carbon dioxide, for example, it's a highly toxic thing. It's a highly toxic gas, but we exhale it, and we're perfectly designed to do that. But unfortunately, in our modern day environments and with the foods we eat and the stresses in our lives, we tend to take in far more toxins than our body was designed to have to cope with. So it's got a real juggling act going on in there. Toxins can be divided into two groupings. Exogenous, these are things that come into our body from the outside environment. So as we just said, things like foods that we eat, air pollutants, all sorts of things, tobacco inhalation. They can either be in excess, unusable, or an outright poison. Now, apples, we would agree, are a helpful food to eat. But if I said to you, I would like you to sit down and eat a 25-kilo sack of apples, you wouldn't get all that far through that sack before you'd be saying, I don't think apples are very good for me, all right, because they would be having accumulated to a point where they're a threat to your body. Unusable, well, nitrogen, for example, we breathe in nitrogen gas and we exhale nitrogen gas. And we breathe in about 78% and we exhale about 78% because we have no use for it. So it just comes in and goes out. Yeah? There are things that just are temporary house guests. And outright poisons, of course. If you go down to the embankment here in London and you see some of those poor individuals who have run out of ability to obtain alcohol, so they're now drinking methylated spirits. I mean, you know, you wouldn't believe the degree of poison that the body is able to survive. It's quite incredible. You have to really work hard at killing yourself. It's not that easy. Endogenous are things which are created from the inside of the body, as we've said, such as carbon dioxide and so on and so forth. So the body is continually cleaning house. Now the trouble is that if the level of toxins are excessively high, you need to have an excessively high ability for brain and bodily cells to communicate with each other to keep you clean inside. In other words, you need to have a very, very vibrantly charged up nervous system to cope with high levels of toxicity. Unfortunately, most people do have a very high level of toxins in their body, and they also have a low level of vibrancy, because the quality and quantity of their sleep is poor or not enough, and besides which they are wasting so much of their nervous energy in activities such as getting emotionally distressed and eating diets that are tremendously high in their demand upon the nervous system. And we end up with this big gap between the work that needs to be done and the available nervous energy to do that work. And this gap is what we fall through. In other words, it's disease. This is where disease really gets a grip of us, when we don't have the ability to meet the need of the work that's got to be done inside the body. Ideally, we want to have this much nervous force and vibrancy and a low level of toxicity. And then we keep well on top of the situation. And even if something untoward happens, like we have a leg fracture or something, or a car accident, boom, we've still got enough available nerve energy to deal with that crisis. So how do we minimize the toxins and how do we maximize the nervous energy? Well, as far as the nervous energy is concerned, we need to be making sure that we're getting sufficient sleep. Mostly, people tend to be impressed with things that cost a lot of money and are difficult to pronounce. If they're difficult to pronounce and they cost a lot of money, oh, they probably really could do me good. Perhaps I should splash out. Sleep, we can all say that. It isn't difficult to pronounce. Does it cost anything? No. So we tend to undervalue it, because this is the mentality of our society. We undervalue it, but it is so powerful. And I'm sure you know how different you feel when you perhaps have burnt the candle at both ends, as opposed to when you wake up after a really good night's sleep. It's a vital aspect of your health care. Now, it's lovely to see people who come along and want to listen to Doug talking all about nutrition and so on and so forth. And nutrition is a very, very important subject. But there is more to creating health than just what you eat. Now, the way that I see it is that I see it like a wagon wheel. And each spoke of that wagon wheel represents one of your body's needs. Needs that have to be met in order for it to thrive in terms of health. One spoke is certainly that it is fed the diet that it is designed to consume. Anything outside the diet that it is anatomically, biochemically and physiologically designed to consume, it will suffer accordingly. But it's not the only spoke. There's another spoke. And this spoke is movement. We are designed to move, right? And, you know, I've noticed that if you go into a room and there's something on the floor that vaguely looks like a creature, perhaps it's a mouse or a spider or something like that, what do most people do to find out if it's alive or not? Kick. We've got any animal rights activists. Okay, touch it in some way to see if it moves, okay? Because we know movement is life, right? The more you move, the more alive you are. The less you move, the more dead you are, okay? And so if you touch this creature, it doesn't move, you tend to think, oh, it's either not well or it's dead. If it's stiff, it gives you another clue. Movement is life. Now, our bodies are designed to move, and if we don't move, if we habitually have a sedentary lifestyle, the effects of that will accumulate, and there isn't one system in your body that is not negatively affected by inactivity. Take your lymphatic functioning as an example, your lymphatic system. Your lymphatics are responsible for keeping you clean out inside, of keeping you clean of all those toxins. But your lymphatic system does not have a heart like your blood circulation to pump it round. It relies on changes in pressure. In other words, it relies on movement. Rebounding or trampolining is an excellent thing for changing pressure because of the G-force. Really gets your lymphatics pumping. Yeah? Going on the Ferris wheel, another really good one, although not commonly done. But any sort of movement, changes of direction, instantly changes pressures within my body, and my lymphatic system gets a good buzz. Yeah? We are designed to move. Most, and I have to say that I have extensive experience in working with exercise specifically tailored for older adults. And in fact, in a couple of weeks' time, I'm running a postgraduate exercise professional teacher training course for qualified fitness professionals who want to work with older people. And I can tell you that from all the studies that I've read and all the things that I've observed in working with older people is that most situations or health conditions mechanically that are related to people getting older are nothing to do with chronology. Nothing to do with it. They are due to accumulation of a sedentary lifestyle. And this is the thing about health. You don't wake up on Monday perfectly healthy, and on Tuesday you have a heart attack. How many times have you heard people say that? They say, oh, he was perfectly all right at work yesterday, he was really well yesterday, and he's dead today. Of course he wasn't well yesterday, he was about to be dead. Okay? There was an accumulation of something. Admittedly, if he was knocked down by the number 9 bus, that's different, but we're talking about a degenerative disease. It's accumulation. The good news is that health works in exactly the same way. Every little thing that you do in a positive way to support your body's needs contributes to creating your health. When you're sitting there at the bus stop and the person next to you lights up a cigarette and you choose to get up and walk upwind of them, you have created something very important to the overall accumulation of your habits and what you're bringing about in terms of your health. It's these little things that really do count, that aren't hard to pronounce, don't cost a lot of money, and they seem insignificant, but they make such a difference. They make such a difference. Now, apart from the diet and the exercise, and incidentally, one little rule that I have I find really works well and helps people, is that when we consider every animal in nature either has to swim or run or crawl or forage or fly or do something to obtain its meal. It does not kind of sit there in its tree and suddenly, ding, someone's handed it a banana. You know, it doesn't happen like that. They all have to move. So a little rule that I like to implement and I find helps people is to think that you always move before you eat. Now, I'm not saying you have to go to an hour and a half aerobics class, or you have to go out on a push bike and cycle 10 miles. Just, for example, doing a couple of push-ups on the floor and saying, right, that's earned my lunch. Maybe seeing a staircase and running up and down it 3 times and saying, okay, that's earned my dinner. You would be amazed. If you spent 10 minutes 3 times a day assuming that you're eating 3 times a day, you just take 10 minutes before each meal to do something, a 10-minute walk, whatever it might be, go dig the garden for 10 minutes. You're doing half an hour's exercise a day. Yeah? Now times that by a week, then times it by a month, and you can see how much can accumulate towards your health bank account that you're creating. It's a very simple little rule, it works really well. So there's diet and there's exercise, the quality of air that we breathe. Now you can last longer without food than you can without water, but you can last longer without water than you can without air. The most precious possession you have in your life is your next inhale. If you were deprived of it for a moment, you would realize how much it meant to you. Now the fact that we can survive so short a time without air gives us some indication as to how important air is to the functioning of our physiology. And yet, how often do we allow ourselves to really cut the cable of communication between our body when our body senses that the stale air in the room we're in, or the place we are in has got, fumes in it, or carbon monoxide, or even tobacco fumes, or whatever it is. We cut the cable, we sort of register it on some level, but we ignore it as being relatively unimportant. It is not relatively unimportant. It is incredibly important. There was a study done by Alexander Leaf, who worked for the National Geographic, and he studied the people who had the longest lifespans on our planet. And he looked at the Abkhasians, the Vilcabandans, and the Hunzicuts. And they had various things in common. One of them, of course, was the quality of their food, which was a vegetarian diet, with very minimal exceptions in all 3 cases. But one other thing they all had in common, they all live at very high altitudes. Now, what does that tell you about the quality of air being really important? Yeah? You have a right to breathe fresh air. You have a human right. You were born with that right to breathe fresh air. And you have a right to extract yourself from anywhere where it isn't fresh and put yourself somewhere else. Unlike the plants, who are stuck to one spot, you can move around. Although you wouldn't think so, the way some people think about people. Food, exercise, air, sunlight. If there was no sun on this planet, it would be a black ashen ball with no life form on it at all. Without sunlight, we cannot turn the ergosterol in our skin into vitamin D, and without vitamin D, we can't use calcium. Without sunlight in our lives, we become psychologically depressed and even psychotic. Sunlight is absolutely vital. Sunburn is not a good thing. I would never encourage that in anybody, but getting sufficient sunlight in your eyes and on your skin. How many times have you seen people in the street with sunglasses on, and it's not even sunny? Yeah, it's all to do with street cred, right? Okay, you kind of have to look cool in your bins. Well, the trouble is with looking cool in your bins is that you end up not looking quite so cool with your white stick later on. Yeah, because our eyesight will deteriorate if we don't get sufficient sunlight on our eyes. And so, as I said, will our emotional poise, which brings me on to our stress. You could have the perfect diet. You could be exercising to an exquisitely, superbly designed program. You could be breathing the freshest of air, and you could be as sick and diseased as heck because your emotions were a mess. Yeah? Because you're an emotional basket case, basically. You hadn't got the ability, you hadn't developed the skill to be able to create for yourself emotional poise. Now, I'm not going to hang on that one too long, but I would just point out to those of you who might be in any doubt that religion and spirituality are not by any means necessarily the same thing. And I say that because I do know people and have worked with people who have been really turned off from religion in such a big way that even the word religion or the word God sort of sends them running, screaming out of the room. They hate it. And for that reason, they've never actually started to explore the meaning of their life, or the fact that there is more to their life than just getting up, going to work, coming home, watching the TV and going to bed again. Yeah? And these people therefore walk around in what I call spiritual bankruptcy. They have a gaping void inside of them that needs filling, and they're unable to find a way to fill that. So if that does sort of ring a bell with you, I encourage you to consider going out and really getting stuck into some popular psychology books, really starting to explore a little bit. If you have been turned off by religion, you can still become a very spiritual person and become enriched in that way by designing your own path that works for you. Just to point that out. Now what I want to do to evaluate how healthy you are is I want to pose you with a few questions. Before I do, I will just say that somebody Doug and I know in Miami said to us recently that because genetically he was predisposed to having bowel cancer, he was regularly going to have an upper endoscopy, which is basically sticking a camera up your bottom end and exploring what's going on inside your colon. Now, obviously, this isn't a very natural thing for the body to experience. And we questioned this individual and said, well, if you did find, because we know he's sort of very anti the medical establishment, this particular individual, so we said, what would you do if you found that they said, oh yes, you've got, cellular dysplasia, or you've got cancer in situ, or whatever, what would you do? And he says, oh, I wouldn't go down the medical route. I said, okay, fine, so he wouldn't say, so what would you do? And he really couldn't answer. He said, well, he kept saying, well, at least I'd know. I was saying, right, so not only would you have bowel cancer, but you'd be really distressed as well. What would you do? The whole point I'm making is that when we do those sorts of examinations, we're not, it's called preventative healthcare, we're not preventing anything. We're discovering it. We're discovering the result of our mistakes. If we find the lump in the breast the size of a pea, a garden pea, it has taken at least 10 years for it to grow to be that big. So if we find it, we haven't prevented it, we've just discovered it. The whole point is that if we can draw our energy away from this so-called preventative medicine which doesn't prevent, and invest that energy into providing our body with everything it needs to absolutely thrive, that is as good as we can ever do. And there's a quote that I use in nearly every talk that I give by a great friend of mine, Dr. Nedula Burton from Australia. And she always says, it's never wrong to do the right thing. In other words, whatever is wrong with you physically, you still do the same thing. You look after yourself as best as you possibly can. Can I ask you to raise your hand if you do not have anything to write with?